Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Inside Movies Galore. I'm your temporary host, SeptumSin, as we dive into the hairy depths of the greasy mustache with today's film in Mustache Matinee. So we've got Mo here, who's going to be running us through. What film do we have today?
Well, tonight we have a tantalizing tale of love and lusty mannequins in the city called Maniac from 1980. This was directed by William Lustig with a screenplay by C.A. Rosenberg and Joe Spinell, based on a story by Joe Spinell. It stars Joe Spinell and Carolyn Monroe for the most part, along with a couple of adult actresses, I think, up in there.
And Tom Savini.
Yeah, Tom Savini is in there. Dual mustache action tonight.
Yes.
It's got music by Jay Chataway. It's distributed by Analysis Film Releasing Corporation. And it was released on January 30th of 1981 in New York. And it looks like it had a March 6th of 1981 West Coast premiere. And it's a pretty greasy little film. You know, your intro was fairly spot on. So I guess we'll do first impressions here. I'll kind of circle around to all you guys, and then I'll do mine last. So, Brandon, what's your first impression of Maniac?
Well, I had never seen it before. I'll also get to Dave's first impression as well at the end of this. I had never seen it before. I had heard of it through reputation. I mean, as many of y'all who've, well, worked with me know, I was never all that into horror when I was younger. I didn't get into horror until my later years, late 20s. And as I did a lot of horror research, this film did keep coming up. So I always meant to get it and meant to watch it. I eventually did pick it up from Blue Underground around the same time that we covered Intruder, just because I mistook. I kept confusing it because I felt like the covers looked similar for some reason. Um, but I finally did decide to break it out and watch it for the show. We had a pretty cool watch party. Me, Jake, and Forrest got together and watched it on the 4K TV, so it was really cool. And I got to hear some of the commentary, what was going on, so it was quite informative. And reminded me, it was kind of weird because I had been doing a couple of background slasher films prior to this, and I watched Peeping Tom probably just a couple weeks prior, and I thought to myself, this one definitely took a lot of inspiration from that when it came to just style and substance. So, I mean, this is an early slasher after all. I mean, it's not the earliest by any means. I mean, Black Christmas was years before this, but still quite fun. And Dave had wanted me to bring forth. I wrote my little notes on it that he actually had first heard of it when he watched the documentary Video Nasties, and it was on the list.
Nice.
So he found it for $8 at half price books, and felt like it gave him some Black Christmas vibes, especially the remake where you had the portrait of the point of view of the killer. He thought there was a lot of good kills, and it was an enjoyable romp overall.
There is some romping going on, for sure. So what about you, Forrest? I assume this isn't your first time watching Maniac.
Oh, far from it. This was a frequent rental for me in high school, throughout high school and college. Because I grew up watching. I have grown up a horror fan. And like every time, and by the time I was like 10, 11 years old, I was raiding the horror section of the video stores every time I went. So I actually remember renting this on VHS back in the day. Although I learned this. Although it's funny how I learned about this movie was actually I was watching VH1's Top 100 One Hit Wonders, and they were talking about Michael Sembello's Maniac from Flashdance, because that song was originally written for this movie.
Right.
with different lyrics that were in reference to Frank Zito's character. So that's actually how I discovered it. So I ended up tracked it down, rented it from Hollywood Video. Oh man, this movie is just so grimy. I love how like grimy and sleazy and dirty it is. Some fantastic special effects work from Tom Savini. Joe Spinell, very talented character actor. It's weird, like because the guy was never a pretty boy, but you watch him in like movies like Rocky and The Godfather. He's like typically he's like a very well dressed guy.
He's got that charisma too. You get a little taste of that in Maniac, but
exactly. And then Maniac,
don't forget Taxi Driver.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Taxi Driver too. But then in Maniac, he's just like so unkempt and just like his whole his whole life, even if you didn't know he was a serial killer, it's like his whole life was in squalor. Also I got Carolyn Monroe is also a good attractive female lead. I feel like the whole set environment of 80s New York with all the crime and danger definitely added to the atmosphere, definitely enhanced the atmosphere of this movie.
Yeah, it really does. It was real shit back then,
Yep. And it's definitely one I watch every. It's definitely, it's I don't know. I wouldn't say it's an all-time. It's like I would say an all-time favorite, but no, it's a favorite of mine. But oh god, I'm just trying to think about
there's definitely other slashers that would be way higher on my list in terms of just me liking them overall, but Maniac's on the list for sure. It's down there somewhere, but it's on there.
Yeah, and I feel, this was also at this time. I feel like the whole I would say like the late 70s, maybe even just the 70s through the late 80s was like a golden age of indie horror that was set and shot in New York City. And
now there's a lot of it, and a lot of it's good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'd imagine this as a horror kid growing up in New York, this would be an impossible one to miss. Eventually, someone's gonna be like, "Well,
But
you want to look at movies that were shot in the city? Check this one out."
Exactly.
So, what about you, Jake? I assume you're a lifelong fan of Maniac down there.
Not so much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have some differing opinions on tonight's podcast. This was definitely one that I couldn't swear to it. I'd never heard of this. The film definitely has a reputation that precedes it, and I probably had heard of the movie somewhere along the way. I've definitely been hearing about it since I've been hanging out with these folks, because it's been repeatedly mentioned, as Septum said, when we did Maniac Cop and Intruder. Maniac itself was mentioned many times, and I was a little surprised that it took so long to get back around to it. This is definitely the first time I saw it, and I went into it expecting something that I might barely be able to stomach, and I was pleasantly surprised on that note that the gore is tolerable for the most part. From what I saw, much of it was almost tame by what I have grown
by today's standards.
Used to, yes. Well, not even by today's standards, but like the standards that I'm sort of starting to set.
Yeah, I feel like I've shown you worse at this point.
You have shown me worse, no doubt about it. And even the famed head exploding shot did not repel me the way I thought it was going to.
Beautifully done, though.
But
Yes.
to be perfect, and I will admit, Savini had a glorious mustache, and the other guy had kind of a
Joe Spinell.
greasy mustache. But this one did live up to the theme.
Joe's is glorious, but at the other end of the spectrum, where it's like gloriously fucking repugnant.
Yes,
Exactly.
There was a film that we covered earlier called "She Was So Pretty." Were you
Right.
on for that one, Jake?
I can't remember. I don't think I was. I think
that
this
was when Katie was with us, and
yeah.
she really liked that film.
Right.
I remember that one was one that she was disappointed because I know Dane didn't like it as much as she had hoped he would.
I think this one, some of the stuff I saw when Katie was with us, honestly, I was expecting Maniac to be more on that note, and I was surprised that it wasn't bloodier. But in fairness, I may have missed some of the gore because yes, partly it's my narcolepsy, but honestly, for a while, the movie, even if I had been fully awake, I don't know, the movie kind of bored me. I just wasn't.
A little slow in parts.
It was very slow at parts, but it just, I don't know. After he kind of sort of got a girlfriend, I guess you could say, it just kind of lost me, and I checked out. I honestly, there's a chunk of the film where I may have been awake, I may not, but I couldn't tell you what happened.
There is method to that madness.
Yeah,
we'll get into that towards the end of this, but like definitely it goes on a bit over long. That's always been my main criticism as well.
Yeah, I think you could trim about maybe 10 minutes from it.
Yeah. So overall, I think it was. I'm glad I finally saw it, and I can put that to rest and not worry about it so much anymore. But overall, yeah, I wasn't terribly impressed one way or the other.
Fair enough. I mean, to each their own. I think Maniac is historic, and again, we'll get into all of that.
Yes,
but it's got its issues for sure in that department. I wouldn't disagree there. So, Dane, not your first time watching it, I assume, yeah?
Well, yes and no. So I had been very familiar with the Cinema Snob's review of the film, and that was the first time I'd ever heard of it. And it's one of my favorite reviews he ever did because that was when he was really committed to his snobbish character, and it was clear that Brad Jones, really loves this film, but in character he was like having to feign offense at it, and he would do stuff like, he's really good at this. No, wait, remember, I'm supposed to be offended, because that was like the whole gag, is that, critics are prejudiced against slasher films and stuff, and he's like, well, I guess I could do what other film critics do when a horror movie creeps me out. God damn it, horror movie, quit creeping me out. And stuff like that. And I was like, that was hilarious. But that's how I was first exposed to the film. But tonight I watched the whole thing in its proper context and everything. I think that there is merit to what Jake's saying, as far as if you were really judicious about the actual plot of this thing, there's about maybe 30 minutes of plot that's stretched out over an hour and a half. So you could criticize it for that. I think a movie like this is ultimately made or broken on the basis of the lead actor. And luckily, Joe Spinell is really good in this. Like, he's captivating. Yes. He's really he gets this guy, and make of that what you will, but it's like he really understands this guy. And this is one of the few, so I think it was Dave's impressions that Brandon relayed. So there is a reason why Black Christmas, the original, is my favorite slasher film, and this movie understands why I like what that movie did well, which is that it took that so the slasher genre, especially as it got going, it got very like campy and kind of cheesy and mainstream
tongue in
and
cheek.
that kind of and it just
Yeah,
what I
over the
like
top.
what I like about this film and Black Christmas was that they took the kills, they took the whole idea of women being stalked and all that, took it very seriously and played it seriously, and it wasn't like it's sleazy or it's meant to be. What's meant to be disturbing is disturbing, and it's shown in its disturbing detail, and you don't necessarily get the idea that you're supposed to like because a criticism of Friday the 13th is that people are meant to identify like the sexually frustrated males are meant to identify with Jason or things like that, or at least the criticisms lobbed against it. That's what they would ultimately say. And I would be lying if I said I didn't see a certain degree of that with some slashers that came along that kind of imitated some of the successful ones, including Friday the 13th, because that did imitate Halloween. But the difference, I think, here is that, we're not meant to condone what Frank does, but we also are put in his mindset in a way that I think a lot of slasher films don't, and even films about serial killers don't necessarily. There's such a thing as you can empathize with someone or you can try to understand them without condoning what they do. And in this case, I think that because Joe Spinell is so good at at this portrayal, I think he really makes you understand why he is the way he is, and there is a historical basis to it based on like Son of Sam, based on some other killers of the time. Like his psychology has some real roots to it. And particularly the scene where he kills Tom Savini was directly inspired by the Son of Sam,
Yeah,
by
yeah,
David
for sure.
Yeah.
Kirkwood.
Even dressed like him a little bit.
Exactly, and
That's actually something that because my mom was a young woman in New York City in the late 70s, and she lived through that whole thing.
yeah,
Seemed like a
well,
gnarly time.
but that's what I liked
Yeah.
about this. It did its homework in terms of like the way that psychologically the way that someone like that would be, and
Mhm.
you see it in all of its gruesome detail, but again he plays it like a guy who's really messed up and does a lot of monstrous things, but you can understand how he would conceivably get that way, at least somewhat. It's
Yeah.
not as in depth as it perhaps could be, but it's
No.
enough. It's enough to separate it
He's
from the pack. And I think the fact that it is so low budget, it's so grimy, but in the best possible way. Like they use their low budget to their advantage,
yes.
and they're able to carry. Like I said, it's only got about a half hour's worth of story in it, but because his performance is as good as it is, I think it helps carry us through. And the thing I really have to give a shout out to Carolyn Monroe as well, because I mean she was great as a Bond girl. She was great in Hammer films.
Yeah.
She had quite a storied career, but like here, you know, I often ask myself whenever I deal with like horror films or supernatural films of any kind, although this wasn't supernatural, but I always ask myself if nothing like out of the ordinary happened in this movie, would I still want to see a movie about this person or these people or whatever? And like they have that brief glimmer where they are kind of starting to hit it off, and it's like, you know what? Their chemistry was really believable to me, and
Mhm.
I would like to see a movie about those two, just like even like a romance film. I would love to see a movie
I think
Yeah.
they
about those
did kind
They
of
two.
did do the last horror
yeah,
movie.
Yeah, and I
yeah, it's
saw
sort of
that.
like them riffing on old stuff they'd done, and
Yeah.
there
But
was supposed to be a proper Maniac 2 at some point, but
yeah,
it
Yeah,
never happened, and then Joe died.
they did
So
some they filmed some demo footage, but
yeah. Well, but you get what I'm getting at, which is that even if he wasn't a serial killer, which again those do exist in the world, but they're still out of the ordinary because statistically there aren't that many of them. But my point is, like, even if that wasn't a factor, I could see a good movie there with just the two of them because
oh yeah, they play
they
off
had
each other
really
yeah.
well.
Yeah, they have good chemistry, and I could
I mean-
actually buy them as a couple.
I
you
mean, it
know?
helped. I mean, it helped that both of them were in a lot of like they both. I mean, neither. I mean, both of them were character actors, but both of them were in a lot of A movies,
Yeah,
a lot of critically acclaimed A movies before they did this one.
Yeah, I mean, Carolyn Monroe, she's a genre legend, and a lot of it is because she was never just a piece of TNA, even though she's fine as fuck. But
Yeah,
like, she never, to my knowledge, got naked on screen because she felt like she didn't. If she was going to be there, it should be because she could also act. You know?
yeah. Well,
And
and
she
there's
can.
some people, who are so pretty that sure, it's nice if you see a little bit more of them, but there's also they're so good looking and good at what they do outside of that it's like, well, that's kind of all you need, really. And
Yeah, I never
in
really
her,
needed to see her boobs. I felt like I was just seeing boobs being in her presence on screen.
Mhm.
You know, like
yeah,
it's a
you could
similar feeling because she's just awesome. You know.
you didn't have to see them, but you could feel their presence,
Yeah,
so to
I could
speak.
I feel like
imagine their
and when I
tantalizing
think of someone who's like really, really good, who's like ridiculously attractive while also
points.
being like who kind of fits that criteria you're talking about. Margot Robbie is a
Yeah.
name that comes to mind.
And
For
you
sure.
did get to see her naked in
I could see
Wolf of Wall
that.
Street, but yeah, no, but that's the
Mhm.
exact same. But even if that wasn't there, it's like just the animal magnetism or the charisma or whatever you want to say, that it just emanates off of them, and that's enough. And she definitely has that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Check out, I think it's the first issue of Fangoria for a really good Carolyn Monroe interview from around this time period.
Yep.
It's
Yeah.
illuminating. And you're
It's-
spot on, man. I mean, this movie has that greasy sinisterness that was present in 70s slashers and then kind of, got phased out a bit as the 80s wave of slashers took hold and they kind of went more and more over the top and campy with it. And they arguably got funner, but they lose some of that
They
hard
lost
edge.
their
Like,
edge.
And I
to me,
I wouldn't
Maniac is a murder movie. I call it a slasher
Yeah.
movie by default
Oh.
because that's like the genre.
It's a.
but
I'd say
There's
it's a serial killer movie ultimately, because it's more about the psychology of this guy and
Mhm.
what he does and
Like
how
it has
Exactly.
it really has more in
Oh.
I would say it has more in common with like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer
exactly.
than,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I was gonna mention.
and
than
I'm
Friday the
I'm a
13th.
and
What's
I'm
that,
a
Brendan?
big fan of. Go ahead.
That's why I compared it as we were off screen to giallo type films, was because of the pacing. Because
Yes.
the giallo film really takes its time, but and I'll admit, seeing some of the older slasher films, I mean, A Bay of Blood is another one that has similar pacing and structure to this
Mhm.
one. I feel like that one, and like I say, I feel like I know that Dustin, he came on, he had the theory that that they kind more of them went the psycho route and less the peeping tom route, but I think
Mhm.
this one actually went more the peeping tom route because the killers have a lot more similarity to them. Uh, but also, like I said, it seems like it takes a lot more from those older slasher prototypes, learns more from those and moves forward. But I still feel like there's a giallo element to it.
Oh,
Yeah,
indeed, man. I mean,
I
it's that perfect sort of middle ground between that era of stuff and its transition into the 80s. And then, like I said, it folds back in on itself. Maniac inspired, the increase in like violence for sure in slasher movies at the time. And then it
Yeah.
also did inspire like Fulci to do New York Ripper for sure. There's no question in that. Like,
Mhm.
Well,
the influence came full circle with a movie like this.
and I disagreed with Brandon a little bit in terms of the. So, like, I get where he's going with the influence, some aspects of giallo in terms of the violence level, and even some of the music. The key difference is that the key difference is that giallo films tend to revolve around a mystery plot, and this does not.
Right,
the
but
ac-
that's
and the and
that's like the
the
main thing
acting.
it's missing. If
Well,
we
and
didn't
the
know it
and
was Joe
the
the whole time, and there was like more of the
Yeah.
artsy photography sequences, and then they lit
Yeah.
shit with gels sometimes,
Well,
it's a fucking giallo movie.
If
Well,
if
and not
I'm
only that,
if I'm
but
remembering,
the acting in giallo films, my big complaint about is that the acting tends to be really campy, and a lot of the
It's secondary
actors,
to
Yeah, well, and a lot of the actors that tend to be in giallo films, just by the nature of the Italian film industry at the time, they tended to need to be dubbed, and that kind of stuff is like this feels really pretty raw and real, and that's a noticeable difference. But go ahead, Jake.
Well, I was going to say, and I guess you guys probably know the film better than I did, but I did read up on it. And am I remembering correctly that they did initially want it to have more of those Jello credentials? Like, I think I read they wanted Goblin to do the music and that sort of thing. Like,
That sounds familiar. Bill
Right.
was like a huge fan of that stuff for sure.
Right.
So it's the
And
similarities to the Giallo stuff is intentional. You know, it's
And
he's doing
I'll
it.
go ahead and mention as well, I think one of the things that failed to capture me, but I can understand how in a movie like this it could be seen as a plus. I agree with y'all saying that the movie had very much sort of a greasy, grimy vibe to it. That it really did feel like, well, basically like a low budget kind of. It felt like what I understand it was, which was a low budget, shot on the run kind of. We will catch a shot here when we can, and one there when we can, and it definitely has that vibe to it. And
I would say
Yeah.
gorilla style.
Right.
And they did that.
Right.
Yeah, they
Right.
had to because apparently they couldn't get
Right.
permits.
Permits.
And some of those stories kind of amuse me. They kind of amuse me and kind of disturb me too. Like some of this stuff, like I think we were talking with Forrest about like how the difference in reaction you'd probably get if you were, let's say you were chilling late at night and you hear a gunshot. Here in the RVA, that's not something you're going to be all that happy about. So it would be nearly impossible to film a film like that in Richmond. Let's put it that way. I mean, I
don't know.
was
They're
on
used to hearing gunshots in Richmond.
Right.
Although I feel like given how expensive it is to film in New York now, it'd probably be cheaper to shoot it here in Richmond.
It probably would.
Dustin is here, so he could do his first impression.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Indeed.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, buddy.
So sorry I was a little late. I missed
Right.
time when I started the movie. So I am actually having a surgical procedure done tomorrow, and I had to get supplies. So I got home a little bit later than I expected. Anyway, so I first saw this movie during my big horror revival. Horror awakening. In 2012, it was recommended in, I think it was one of those scary movie. I think it was one of those VH1 or whoever did it, or Bravo or whoever it was, scary movie moments. Anybody remember that 100 scariest movie
that rings
moments?
a bell.
Yes.
Yeah, whoever did that, there was a lot of stuff that I went out to watch. And I think a scene from this movie made it in there, although I don't remember which one. And I remember really liking this the first time I saw it, because I'd never seen anything like it before. I think this was my first splatter movie, which is how a lot of people classify this, as a splatter slasher. And I really just enjoyed it a lot. The music was great. The gore was convincing. I pretty much only have positive things to say about this movie. So my first experience with this was great. And it really kind of burned itself in my mind. And then the remake with Elijah Wood came out pretty much the same year that I saw the original.
Mhm.
And the remake blew me away. Like, I loved the remake.
I was actually fortunate enough to catch that one in theaters.
Oh, that must
Nice.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's a good one, man. Go ahead.
I had a curiosity, Dustin, because I know you had some theories as far as Peeping Tom and Psycho and their relevance to the modern slasher. Do you feel like this one took a lot more from Peeping Tom in a way?
It does feel like it. Like, it feels more visceral and nasty. Like, I hadn't made that connection before. Actually, that's a very good point to bring up. For those who don't know, my theory on that is, when Psycho blew up and became popular, a lot of horror's evolution followed along the lines of movies like Psycho. Well, the same year Psycho was released, a movie called Peeping Tom, which had very different sensibilities and was almost like a modern slasher, already was released. And I'd always wondered, what would happen if Peeping Tom had taken off instead of Psycho, and that had become the prototype for the evolution of horror. Like, what would movies be like? I actually got the idea in a science class when we were talking about the evolution of wings in insects. Like, most winged insects are herbivores because wings developed in herbivorous insects first. What if wings had developed in carnivorous insects? What would winged insects be like today?
Hell yeah.
So that was where I originally got that idea. And
be like Starship Troopers in this bitch.
I'd imagine that the herbivorous ones would have gotten them right quick in that case.
Well, there are winged carnivorous insects, I think. But, or at least omnivorous. But at least at this point. But we were talking about it in the fossil record in that class. So,
I mean, that's definitely interesting to think about with Psycho and Peeping Tom there. I think a lot of both of them would still be in stuff, because even though, like, this for sure has its Psycho elements in it too.
With the mother, the dead abusive mother.
Themes.
Well,
Yeah.
even Friday the 13th takes a lot from Psycho, but it kind of
music.
Music and kind of goes in the opposite direction though, because it's the mother with the son instead of the son thinking about his mother.
Exactly. I think that was too, like, all that stuff sort of had its lifespan or its natural, like, sort of shelf life, where you look at a lot of the earlier 80s or the late 70s, like mid-late 70s sort of slasher type flicks, and they are heavily borrowing from Psycho. But then as you get into the 80s, and there's a lot more slasher movies that people were seeing, they start borrowing from Halloween and the later stuff, and it just kind of phases out a little bit.
When Psycho was ripped right from the headlines, in the same way that I would argue this one was ripped right from the headlines with Son of Sam.
Yeah.
Right. I think we brought up either in Nightmare on Elm Street or Psycho. I can't remember. Maybe both. The fact that both of them set you up to follow a protagonist that they then kill off halfway through the movie, which is a somewhat unusual methodology.
Well, actually, there was one when we were one of the reasons why I made the Giallo connection to me was I had just finished watching a film called The Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave, which is a Giallo.
Craziest titles, don't they?
And that's and that one has a shockingly similar story to it. It's about this, except I mean it's a little bit more sexually, well, maybe not more sexually charged, but differently sexually charged. About a guy who has got a lot of money. He had lost his wife, and he ends up seducing these women, taking them to a sex dungeon and torturing them to death at her wishes, as far as him feeling like she's driving him to it. And there's a lot of similarities to this and that.
I'll definitely have to give that a look. Do you have anything else you wanted to add there on your first impressions, Dustin?
Not particularly, although well, I guess I could add that the music for this is like spectacular too, and it's it's been one of my favorite soundtracks for a long time.
Yeah, it's appropriately discordant when it needs to be, and to such a degree that the cats, their ears were perking up. They're like, we don't like that.
So there's that. So actually, okay, so that disco song that's playing during the scene where Carolyn Monroe is having a photo shoot. I actually had that song in rotation on my Apple Music playlist. And actually, if you're listening to the lyrics, it seems it's kind of eerie. It's like they're talking about like taking, like the song they're singing about taking a bubble bath and leaving a pretty corpse behind.
Well, and you better run. You go for your gun and you know, all that stuff. Which again, we already mentioned the ties to this Michael Cimbello song "Maniac," and whenever I think of this movie now, I think about, instead of she's a maniac, I think of he's a maniac.
As I mentioned in the group, as I mentioned in our group chat, I wish that I would like to see Michael Cimbello re-record that song with the original lyrics.
Yeah, I think that'd be awesome. And
Carpenter
I've
Carpenter
seen
Brute. Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry. Oh well, Carpenter Brute is a French synthwave artist, and he does a cover of this. And during the stage show, they do have like chainsaws and knives like flying in screens on the background.
That's
And
nice.
I actually did send in. He has like a suggestions thing. You can submit questions to, and I did ask him like, "Hey, do you think you'd ever do the original lyrics for this?" And I never got a response, but the idea is out there.
That's good.
It'd be sick as like a vinyl single with a special edition of Maniac or something.
That would
Be
be
dope,
awesome.
like a big box VHS case for it and shit. I'd buy it instantly.
He'd probably be down for it if he could like get it cleared.
Right.
Well, you know what's funny about thinking about that song, and then you think about the rest of the music, and you're like, you know what, that wouldn't really be out of place relative to everything else, because this is very synthy, as is becoming of the late 70s and all throughout the 80s. Kind of a synth score, and of all the times for that kind of music to play in a slasher film, it would have been in the 80s. And you could do it in a serious movie and have it still work. So, I mean, I do think that it could have worked in this. I mean, I think about even a movie like Scarface, which is extremely violent for its time and today. And that soundtrack is really danceable. It's got a great, could put that on at a party or something, and it's like, man, that's still an extremely violent film.
They really did miss an opportunity not to close this bitch out with a dance number with those mannequins and Maniac just blasting. That would have been amazing. So I guess we'll do my first impressions, and then we'll nail out the plot, which will take all of like 2 minutes because it's real simple. But this is one that's, I'm sure I've heard the thing about the song Maniac, much like Forrest did prior to discovering the movie, but I got this for the first time on VHS when I was like 15 or 16 when our local video store was liquidating stock. I don't know how I never rented it before, because as soon as I saw it and like picked it up and looked at the cover, I knew that it was coming home. Like it's just you can't deny that cover, man. Maybe they got it in later and it just somehow slipped under my radar, because it was a surprise when I stumbled on her. And of course, I immediately fell in love with the movie, because much like I think all you guys that saw it at a younger age, I'd never quite seen anything like it yet. I think I was really in the habit until like that, freshman year of high school, kind of when I really started exploring more horror, of just renting the franchise stuff all the time. There was odd slashers here or there that I rented as a kid that were like standalone, but a lot of them, like something like Maniac, if I just read the title as a younger kid, I would have just thought it was some generic Friday the 13th ripoff and probably not sought it out, But I'm glad that I did finally see it, because it definitely got me looking for more stuff like that. You kind of directly go from shit like this to discovering stuff like The Prowler and other things like that.
Alice,
if you haven't, all the old sort of grimier slasher flicks that I missed out on because I was just renting Jason movies over and over again. So definitely changed the whole trajectory of my horror collecting and exploration, and became an instant classic. It's like,
agreed. Yep.
Definitely, you can tell as soon as you look and you see it's from like 1980, 81 in there. Like, it was super violent for the time. It has a feeling to it, unlike, almost any other slasher of the 80s. And it's, as we've already talked about, it still has some of that sinister greasiness from the 70s left over in its veins. And it makes it something pretty special to behold. I guess it was like attacked hard by parents groups for a little bit there for being murder porn, and at the time,
Gene Siskel walked out of it.
It was attacked by feminist groups, I think, too.
Yeah, it was. It had some controversy on her.
I mean, the slasher genre in general was seen as kind of anti-feminist, except, again, I would argue the original Black Christmas actually has a good rooting in the feminism of its time.
The new one has a good vibe of this time too, but a lot of people didn't really want to give it the time of day.
Well,
I mean, you mean the 2012 Maniac, or the
new Black Christmas?
The new Black
the
Christmas.
remake of I heard.
Well, that's because that one's definitely rooted in the feminist vibe of the time. But
Yeah, I've heard not so great things about it, but I also haven't watched it myself, so I can't say one way or the other. But
It's
I
good.
don't know
Just
how you make a feminist version of Maniac, but I hope they
It's-
never
it's-
do that.
the Black Christmas remake. People are gonna probably tune out when I say this. Like, I think it's good. It's just very heavy-handed, and I think
that's
that's
what
what
that's what I've heard. That's what I've heard.
Well,
of it.
yeah.
it's kind of like the reboot of Candyman. I mean, it's good, but it's heavy-handed. It's not subtle.
Yeah. Well, but
Hey,
that's-
they literally fight toxic masculinity.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
what's
he's not kidding,
interesting-
folks.
Well, I imagine that that's exactly what happens. But the so yeah, the slasher genre has tended to be attacked, by feminists and stuff, and a lot of it is not unjustified because there is something of a misogynistic element to
This
a
one
lot
for
of
sure
them.
was one that was singled out as like,
Yeah.
yo, Maniac's fucked up, and for the time, it's like, what? Fair
Well,
enough.
the only
Yeah,
I
it
think
is.
the
That
big
makes it
point
fun.
of difference, I think, with this as opposed to other ones, like for me, I think accusations of that sort of thing would hold more water if the audience is expected to kind of be on the side of the killer or something like that. I think the
Mhm.
difference here is that this movie is very, like, the whole point of it is to put you in the mindset of someone that is not really admirable, and he's crazy, he's a schlub, lives in a derelict apartment and stuff. But he's a lot closer to an actual serial killer. Again, 'cause he
Deeply
was
deranged.
when he was
Yeah, I mean,
ripped right from the headlines. So I mean, he is not, say, a Jason Voorhees who has a mask and he's like really big and beefy and he's supernatural and he's powerful. This guy is again much like someone that could actually exist, and he's not admirable. So if anything, I think this shows the degree it shows you just psychologically where people like this are and why they are that way, at least somewhat. Now, I don't think it goes in quite as much depth as it could, but I
that's
think
some of the
that
magic of it too. It's just a glimpse into the life of this fucking
well,
psychopath.
but
You're not really supposed to identify with it, I don't think, one way or the
yeah,
other. You're
the-
just
the
supposed to be
case-
kind of repulsed by it.
Well,
Exactly.
I think someone
Exactly,
did
but
make
that-
that. I think
Whereas in the remake, he's very sympathetic. Like, you feel
but, like,
very bad for the character.
Well, it's
the
Elijah
case
Wood, bro.
that's
Little North.
my
I can't hate
that's-
him.
that's my point. It's like the case for saying that it's a misogynistic piece or that we're meant to sympathize with the killer or whatever. I think you'd have more of a case for that with something like a Friday the 13th or something that's a little bit more like meant to be fun and mainstream, as opposed to like this, which this is not. I wouldn't call this a fun movie per se. I think it's supposed, when it needs to be disturbing, it is, and it does so for a reason.
I think
I
just
think-
like seriously leveling any of that type of stuff at intentionally gratuitous entertainment is some numbskull shit. Like, we just want to see him kill people. That's it. I don't. If you came out of the 80s or the 90s or whatever, or out of horror fandom as a misogynist, you're probably already going to be that way because of other elements in your life.
Yeah,
I love
more
watching
than
big
more
titty
than
chicks get
likely,
slaughtered on screen.
more
but I
than
love,
more than
I respect
likely, you're
women
right.
too,
I'm just
you know?
more than likely you're right. But what I'm saying is, like, I think there's more evidence, or one could make that case a little bit easier with something that was intended to be like quote unquote enjoyable. I don't think
Yeah.
this is meant to be an enjoyable film.
No,
I think
yeah.
it's meant to be disturbing.
Well, it depends on what everyone's got their own kick, as they say. But I
Yeah,
think
that's true.
I think one of the things that you kind of hit on it, Dane. One of the reasons I think why the film failed to engage me the way it did all y'all is, and I know Brandon can relate to this because I know he's made the same complaint a lot of times about films. I do enjoy, generally, not always, generally, I find it much easier to get into a movie or to enjoy a movie when there is someone there to root for. And I can get in a film like this where maybe that's not the goal that most people would go into the film with. But for me, there has to be some hook. If there's no character that I want to root for, there has to be something else to hook me. And I'm not someone that necessarily enjoys just watching a movie just to see how many people get killed. That's not a hook that works for me.
And that's fair
So
enough, you know, and
Well,
and that is totally accurate with Maniac. It's not. It's
Right.
more supposed to feel like something you saw that you weren't meant to see, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas
Well, that
Maniac
or like,
is meant to be
I
more
could see
enjoyable and
that.
richer.
I could
So-
see that.
the hook for me with this kind of movie, the hook is because I tend to like so conventional cinema, conventional storytelling. Yeah, you have a sympathetic protagonist that you can root for, and you get them through their journey. Blah blah blah. I tend to find in
Oh,
my adult.
I can root for unsympathetic people if there's something else that catches me.
Well, that's kind of where I'm going with this. Is that it's, in my adult life, I tend to really find fascinating movies where I'm not really supposed to like the protagonist, and but there's usually something about them that's either interesting or something about them that you could sympathize with or want to hold on to in spite of everything. And like in this case, again, because they ripped this from the headlines, you can tell that this person has something in him, like a scared, abandoned child inside of him, which is where a lot of
Yeah,
serial killers they
the whole
tend to have that.
psychology
It's very
end of it
direct, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of serial killers they have that inside of them somewhere, and I guess it's like I have a part of me that's like if you could only like save the scared child inside, then they would somehow be all right. But of course, it's never that easy because there's a whole person in there, and in this case, the whole person is a pretty ugly, monstrous one who does monstrous things. But
super nice guy in real life, though. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
just
Joe
supposed to.
Spinell liked to say that this was a movie about like the consequences of child abuse.
yeah, I could
He
definitely
was
see
into it
that.
from what I remember, dude. Like he took it seriously. It wasn't just some throwaway thing he did. You know, he wrote it with the guys and stuff, and
Yeah,
it was a bit of a
this
passion project for both of them, from what I
it
remember.
definitely
Right.
feels like it. It feels like a
Oh, yeah.
personal statement in a lot of ways, as far as like a kind of societal cautionary tale. If anything, we were saying, what was this similar to? Stylistically, this reminded me a lot of a movie that came 6 years later, so it's a little bit of an unfair comparison. And no, I'm not thinking of Henry, a portrait of a serial killer, even though it does have ties to that as well. I was thinking actually of the trauma film Combat Shock, which was actually
Yes.
one of the more serious trauma films, and Lloyd Kaufman has said is one of Trauma's best films. I would agree because that's a very low budget, super grimy, super kind of a societal statement kind of film, but also like a singular person, boots on the ground kind of level. Um,
It
that
takes
that
that
would
New
be a
York
good.
style grime of the
Yeah.
80s and like from
Exactly.
shit like Basket Case and this and like
Yeah.
cranks it up to 11 where you can just almost taste
Oh,
it.
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and that'd be a good one for us to talk about sometime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we got him.
We've had
So I
Basket
guess
Case up for in the past, so I know it's been available.
yeah, it's definitely one that I love.
Yeah.
I love that movie as well, and the sequels.
I don't know
So-
if we've touched on it, but they did a lot of dubious things for this movie. Like they shot illegally a lot of times. Did we touch on that
They
yet?
did.
We did.
Guerrilla filmmaking aspect.
Yeah. Which,
Hey,
Hey, there was just a reality of
Uncle
making these sometimes back then, you know.
Uncle
That's
Lloyd
still
would
a
be
reality,
proud
really.
though.
Yep.
Uncle Lloyd would be proud because Lloyd was the person who had the one, I forget his name, the one really fat guy run down Times Square naked and
Oh, Terra Firma.
yeah, that was classic.
Yeah, it's just one of those things, man. I mean, when you're doing the low budget films, especially back in these days, you know, sometimes you had to break some laws. You would hope that you could ask for forgiveness, you know, even though you didn't ask for permission. But really, you just don't get caught, you know. Even in
Yeah.
where you guys live, Jake, you could fire the gun off. We just got to not be there when they come to fucking. So we got to shoot
Right.
this in like one take,
Well,
two max.
I tell you, like I was talking last night with them about a little independent film that I did shoot some scenes for on the 19th that I don't even know whatever happened to the film. It barely even has an IMDb listing. Like it's very bare bones. But we shot scenes at Chimborazo Park and at I can't remember the name of the park, but it's the one right across from the church in Churchill, the one that gives Churchill its name.
that's my parents' neighborhood.
Right, but basically Churchill is known as a rather violent district. It's been gentrified out the wazoo over the last 20 years, but it is definitely known for these things. So it was interesting because one of the scenes we shot was gunfire, and I was a bystander reacting to gunfire, and I just was thinking, okay, and Churchill, this is an interesting thing to be filming in Churchill.
I'm sure there was a rush to it. Dude. A lot of these
Plenty of real
crime
gunfire in
especially-
Churchill.
Exactly.
Especially like inner city
I-
low budget movies from back in the day, you'd hear stories about
Right.
that. Like the Mac, I think they were talking about how they almost got like stabbed and their camera taken or something when they were filming the movie. But the only reason they didn't
Amazing.
get robbed is because one of the dudes on the cast was like an actual gangster from the area. You know,
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I live just down the street from a real gun range, and last summer I would hear, I think it was 4th of July, I heard a lot of what I thought were gunshots, like celebratory ones in the air and stuff. So I mean, these things
it could
happen.
happen. Yeah.
I live in a not great part of Milwaukee, and I hear what seem to be gunshots or fireworks all the time. So I'm kind of like, that's annoying, and that's the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, most people, if they just hear it off in the distance, aren't gonna be ringing the cops. It's even around here, like it was super small town, but if it happened, I think people would, unless there's like you're popping clips off, they're just gonna think it was like a firework or something. There'd be that one redneck guy that's like, oh no, I know gunshots, that wasn't no firework, but that's it. So I guess now is a good time to just nail down the plot of this. It's real simple. We got Joe Spinell playing this dude, Frank Zito, who is just a serial murderer living in this creepy apartment in New York, where he lives with a bunch of mannequins and shrines to like his mom and
Dolls.
general filth. A lot of dolls too. Polly want a cracker, all that good stuff. And his thing is just going around murdering people. Eventually, he meets up with this photographer played by Carolyn Monroe named Anna, and they kind of form a relationship, which seems to quell his violent urges for a little bit, at least as best as they can, but eventually it just unravels into insanity. And, there's a lot of mommy issues sprinkled throughout and some really cool voiceovers by Joe Spinell that still make my skin fucking crawl. So I guess
He has
we'll just run through.
He has very creepy monologues in this. Like there are moments where he's talking to himself, but he's talking to his mother, and it's just very, very intense, like little scenes.
You can
Yeah,
tell
they
he's
really
kind of
are.
conflicted about what he does throughout in those monologues. It kind of gives an insight into who he is.
Well, and that's what I was saying before. Like this is a movie that is made or broken by the central performance, and we're just lucky that he does such a good job of it, and he's able to carry a scene just by himself, really talking to himself.
Yeah.
Now,
it's
I
great.
will admit that, like, if the film had been someone who was phoning in his role, it would have just been awful. And I don't know that I want to revisit this but part of me is curious about the Elijah Wood version, because I have seen him go dark and he can do it. So
It is amazing. We should do it.
Yes.
I would have suggested it for this month if he had a mustache. He does not keep the Frank Zito mustache.
Yeah.
He's got a mustache and a little soul patch.
See, that's where it
doesn't
fails.
quite count.
It's more like a thick 5 o'clock shadow because it's Elijah.
Right.
He's just a little boy. Man,
This
that's
one
why we
did
love
live
him.
up to the mustache matinee line, so
Mhm.
I'll
Yeah.
give it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
double
it
duty
is.
on it.
Well, Joe Spinell's definitely, if he wasn't a serial killer here, if he wasn't a loan shark in Rocky, if he wasn't like a sleazy cab driver in Taxi Driver, he would totally have like the porno stash. But not a porno star. He would be a guy behind the camera directing.
Are you sure?
the
I mean,
porno
he does.
actors.
Yeah, yeah, he's
I get
What's
strong Ron Jeremy vibes from him in this.
Yeah, he's
movie.
got that
Yeah.
burly
yeah,
body.
he was Ron Jeremy's forgotten long lost brother. I mean, you know.
Yeah, but the thing
That's a
is,
version
though,
of Twins I'd like to have seen.
but he doesn't give off like the in front of the camera vibe, even though Joe Spinell himself was in front of the camera a lot of times. I'm just like character wise, he gives off like he'd be the guy who would be directing.
Oh
the
yeah,
scene,
I could see
at
him as
least
like a porn
to me.
producer wearing
Yeah,
Hawaiian shirts like Captain Lou
that's kind
Albano.
of
That'd be
the
awesome.
that's the vibe he gives off to me. But
Bunch
no,
of gold chains.
he definitely covered off the mustache criteria for this time.
For sure. So basically, movie kicks off with that badass beach kill where he just strangles the shit out of that dude after slitting his girlfriend's throat. He's peeping at him through like a little viewfinder at first. It's proper greasy, some heavy like that
You
breathing.
just hear breathing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That scene always just, I mean, it's another one of those classic kills in these types of movies that feels like a real murder. It's kind of drawn out. The feet are just flapping around. It's not necessarily particularly graphic, but it's executed in a vicious way. And you guys got anything particular you want to say about that kill there?
Well, that's something, just the very idea of that I want to bring up. That what I love about this film, about the original Black Christmas, is that it isn't so much about the body count per se or about the exact murders themselves, even though they may indeed be well done visual effects wise, or they may be particularly grisly or whatever. But it's more so about why are these things happening and the significance of each one. Like you feel each one of these in a way that you perhaps don't in some of the Friday the 13th that have the larger, like I've noticed that the not as good sequels of Friday the 13th, they tend to have a larger body count and they tend to have more elaborate kills, but you don't really feel the impact of any of them really. It's just more of an inevitability.
It's more
But,
like, yeah,
yeah, basically, and but it's and obviously the audience is there to see how are they going to do it this time and in what way and all that stuff. So they put their emphasis there. But story wise, yeah, these are a little bit more grounded types of kills as far as like you get stabbings, you get strangulations, all that. It's more about why is it happening and what does it mean for this character's declining sanity, which was already pretty tenuous at best. So, I think that in terms of like whenever you talk about the kills and stuff, that it's less about an individual kill and it's more about why is it happening and what does it mean for this person.
Well, in this first one, dude, I mean, it sets the tone perfectly.
Yeah.
It's creepy, it's mean spirited as fuck, and
and supposedly
it
was
looks
a
like
direct reference to Jaws, which is kind of cool. If
Yeah.
you're gonna pay homage to the best, But,
hell yeah, that's what we need is one where Joe Spinell plays the shark in Jaws.
Jaws
I
were the
think
most
that was
fun.
kind of the idea. Somebody said
Yeah,
that was
he
kind of the
kinda
idea
did.
that he was a human shark.
Yeah,
I get it.
could
I
see
mean, it's just I
that.
want him
He
deep faked
kinda
in there,
did
like
I mean, he
swimming
was a
like
lone
dolphin.
shark.
Actually,
Yeah.
there's a fun bit of trivia with Joe Spinell. When Jaws was being considered for like the Academy
I was
Awards,
hoping someone would bring this up.
yeah. So there's video of Spielberg watching the award ceremony with Joe Spinell, and I tried to find it in full so I could rewatch it and make sure I was remembering it right. But the way I remember it is Steven Spielberg's like looking into the camera. He's like, "All right, I'm here with Joe Spinell and whoever this other guy is." He says the name, but I don't remember it myself. And we're sitting here, and Jaws is about to win Best Picture. Yeah, and he's filming the stage, and they read, "Best Picture goes to some bullshit you don't care about," and he's like, "Oh no, I'm an asshole." And
Dude,
just
he
like,
was mad
"Don't
hyped
worry
for him
about
to
it,
win that.
kid."
Yeah, he's like, you got robbed, you know, but he has that very much like he's like your Italian sort of, maybe not full on gangster uncle, but gangster
Right.
affiliated uncle that's just robustly stoned on cocaine, and it's just heartwarming, though, in that heartwarming kind of way, right? Where
Well,
you want this uncle around.
that's kind of who
Yeah,
that's
Spielberg's like, cancel my day, and Justin Mill's like, yeah, we're getting drunk. Cancel my
well,
week.
that's kind of who he was. That's kind of who Gazzo was.
He was a great
in Rocky.
guy.
Well, that's kind of who Gazzo was in Rocky. Like he was a loan shark. He wasn't really a good guy per se, but he wasn't really that bad a guy either, because like he always treated Rocky pretty well, you know, and he
even though he called Adrian a retard.
yeah, well, no, that was his right hand
That was
guy.
Paulie.
But, well, not Paulie. It was it was
Joe was a
Gazzo's
solid dude
guy.
in real life. I mean, I think he had a huge hand in getting Rocky made to begin with, and he
Yeah, I
was
mean,
well loved by
Nice.
people
He
for
did a
always
lot for
hooking
Sylvester
everybody
Stallone.
up.
I mean, he did give Stallone his place to stay when he was like young and broke.
Cool.
Yeah, but I just
Stallone was on hard
I
times
was,
when he was back in those days.
and we could could talk about the
Italian stallion.
yeah the Sylvester
Well,
Stallone porno.
Real quick, I want to go ahead and echo a point Dane made, though, that I agree that when you're dealing with films that have a high body count, this is, again, one of the reasons why I really don't go into it like, oh, how many people can we kill, you know? I do like when I don't always like seeing kills. And the more you spend time on a character, sometimes the less I like it. But it is more effective when it happens to people that you've spent some time with. And a really good example this week, I saw the new film from Guy Ritchie, Wrath of Man. I don't know if anyone's seen that yet. That's a Jason Statham film. And the film turns into a friggin' bloodbath in the final act. And some of the kills, you're like, man, really? You know, I like that one. And it's just like, you know, because they had spent some time and because some of the kills came out of nowhere and were shocking, you know, that's like I said, it's a little bit different. That's more of an action revenge flick, but it's the same basic idea that, like I said, if you get to know people a little bit more, it does bring things home a little better. You know, that's like, you know, the original Nightmare on Elm Street. There's not that many kills, but most of them you feel because you know the characters, you know? So it's like...
Yeah, this one's kind of like a middle
Yeah.
ground, you know? There's not
Yeah.
that many kills. It's got a pretty average body count. They all do pack a punch, but most of them are randos, you know, and that's to
Well, and that's-
illustrate the
that's-
psycho killer aspect
Yeah.
of it. You know?
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going. Like, we don't really get to know any other character but Frank Zito all that well. But the way that the kills are done, it takes them seriously, and it shows them as grisly and gruesome and not glamorous really at all. Which is
And
how
not
it
as
should be,
an
because-
as not
well,
as an afterthought or a notch on a belt, you know. That's
yeah,
like,
but it's and a murder of this type in real life is not cool, or it isn't. To quote Pee Wee, it isn't glamorous or cool or kids.
Not at all. He's a sweaty motherfucker in this movie.
Yeah.
Which leads us to our next kill, where he, you know, kind of is walking down the street with his collar popped all awesome, and he runs along some ladies of the night, you know, some friends of the road, and you know, one thing leads to another, and he decides to head on up for a little action with the one gal. And this kill's interesting because it almost seems like he didn't intend on killing her, which is pretty in line with a lot of like, you know, free roaming serial killers like this back in the day.
Yeah.
He's just kind of trying to, like, you know, have some time with a
Be
lady, and then it
normal.
goes south. Yeah, he just gets lost in his mommy issues and strangles her, but good, while her face is, you know, transforming back and forth between her own face and the face of his mother, which I didn't notice for a lot of times when I watched this back in the day.
I still haven't noticed that, and I've seen this movie like over a dozen times.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
next time you
noti-
watch
I
it, dude, if you pay
noticed it.
attention, the face changes a couple of times while he's strangling her, and it's a pretty long strangulation for even, you
It
know, movie
is.
standards, right? Like,
When he's got
It's
that
not-
face, he's got the face that he makes as he strangles her, which is appropriately disgusting and deranged and not. That's an actor who is not, because you know how some actors, they are so concerned with kind of self-preservation that it gets in the way of the performance. Not this time. He's going for it, and he's not concerned about how it's going to make him look. He wants it to be as ugly and awful as it would be in real life, which is great.
Yeah, it's not glamorous at all, and
No.
I'd be scared as hell. Nice as Joe Zito is, I'd be,
Yeah.
or not Joe Zito, fucking Joe Spinell. As nice as he is in real life, if he had all that cocaine in his system and he's choking me like that, even for pretend, I might be nervous he would like go for real with it,
Yeah. Which now here's something I some humorous observations with the not humorous scene. So right before that, when the two prostitutes are talking to each other, they say, that he wanted the ultimate or whatever, but it's like we never find out what that is. And I was like, I
same thing
want
you
to
want,
know.
baby.
Yeah.
I wanted to know what the ultimate was. I mean, I was expecting it to be something like a Cleveland Steamer or something,
Yeah.
But it's like you build it up. It's like I want to know what that is, but they never say. And then the other thing I thought was funny was the one that he actually goes up to the room with, and she's got her little shorty shorts, the '80s shorty shorts there. And then
They're
underneath it,
pretty fabulous. I enjoy
well,
them.
and underneath it, she's got this what to me looks almost like a ballet leotard or something. And I was like, I feel like I feel like if she wasn't doing her line of work, that she would be like at a she'd be teaching a dance class or something.
Dude, and her sexy poses are 80s as all get out. Like,
I know.
I always chuckle a little bit at that.
Yeah, I was sort of like, if I saw her doing that in front of me, I might.
None of that looks good. What was
I would
deal
probably laugh. I wouldn't be turned on. I would probably laugh.
She's
I
a good
have
sport
to
about
admit-
all of it, though. I mean, she got friggin' Joe rolling around on her all sweaty too, and I mean, she acts the hell out of that scene, getting strangled and stuff too with the screaming. And
Well, and I don't envy the character or the actress in that moment, because you have this massive guy like squishing you down in the bed, and it's like,
Right.
that cannot be fun. Even if he wasn't strangling you, you'd feel like you were suffocating under all that.
Right. I'm sure Joe apologized profusely between takes and stuff because he was just that kind of a fellow. But and then afterwards, he goes and throws up, as one does when you just randomly strangle a prostitute.
As one does.
Yes.
And then he comes out and
All the
scalps her,
time.
which was a very controversial scene back in the day. It was it's still pretty gruesome, by today's standards, maybe not so much.
And the funny part about that, well, so that was Tom Savini on the makeup as well.
Yeah, I think all of it's Tom.
Well, so the makeup effects there, because he also did the effects for the first Friday the 13th and several of them afterward, say around the same time. I think the makeup in here, I think, is better, and I think it blends together better. The colors hold up of like the prosthetic relative to the actual skin tones of the people. I think it holds up better here, and again, partially it could also be just that it's treated more seriously, so that could
and the
also
general
be part
grittiness of it makes it feel more snuffish,
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. What do you guys? Anybody got any thoughts on this and this scene here? This is our first graphic kill of the film.
Yeah. I mean, all the kills are pretty much vignettes if you think about it. So they're all their individual thing. They could all be, if you really wanted it to, you could make those kills into short films in and of themselves.
Oh yeah, I mean, and it all kind of is bookended with him at his apartment, like just being fucking creepy,
Yeah, this movie is not really about the plot as much as it's about a portrait of a personality and a portrait of a
serial killer.
A serial killer and a societal deviant, if you want to be more broad about it. And those can be fascinating in and of themselves. Like, they don't have to conform to a lot of the the storytelling conventions of like a mystery or a through line, throughout the thing. It's just, this is someone who deviates from the norm. This is their life, and there you go.
He just happens to be getting away with murder because, I mean, pretty much
Mhm.
directly after that kill, we get the headshot after another little session of him like weeping and, you know,
You get to see
talking to his
apartment
dolls.
and a bunch
Yeah.
of, and it becomes pretty clear just how crazy this guy actually is
Yeah.
in that moment.
Yeah, and kudos to the set design because in absence of dialogue or formal backstory or whatever, you can learn a lot about a character through their environment. And I
Yeah,
do
and
think
his looks like a proper serial killer lair, like
yeah, there's a lot of good details with not just the dolls and the mannequins and stuff, but like the writing on the wall, the color, the purple color, some of the pictures he has. It's
Mhm.
like, yeah, that helps to paint a character really
well, just
nicely.
like all the scars and cigarette burns on his body that you see, like you don't know if those are self-inflicted or it was like his mom because he's always talking to his mom and
They are from his
sort of
mom.
yeah. I
They
mean, it's
explain it
like
in the background materials.
I
oh,
could
do they?
buy that.
Yeah, but I mean that's obviously the implication too. But the point is, it's like just kind of there, all that stuff, and it puts this creepy layer over everything that makes it really rewatchable too. Because you'll notice little things there, like the face changing and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that's really smart. Now, the only thing, there were only a few little things that I had some issues with that are not super important, but they did stick out to me. So he kills her in the hotel room. He has to have snuck her out somehow, but we never see that. And there is a little bit of a red herring with we see him effortlessly carrying what we think is her body, and it's not because it's the mannequin. So we're led to believe that he must have somehow disposed of her or something.
Well, they're
But
reporting like the murders on the news and stuff at
In the
Yeah.
some point in
newspapers.
there. So I think he's just
And-
leaving them and just taking the scalps to nail onto the mannequins. I don't think he's bothering with body disposal.
I
Yeah,
actually
well-
find
well,
it
but-
funny because I thought to myself when that scene originally happened that it's like, oh my, they are really low budget. They want to pass off that mannequin as the real person. It's like, oh
Yeah.
no, it's really supposed to be a mannequin. Never mind.
Well, that's
Yeah,
such
well,
a
that-
creepy layer to it. He
Mhm.
can't really take the whole body as a trophy, but he takes like the scalp and their
Scalp.
clothes and then
Clothes.
dresses the mannequin to them, and sleeps
Mhm.
with them and shit. I think he's like handcuffed to it at one point.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. Well,
It's
then,
gnarly.
then the other thing that he says, to Carolyn Monroe, but we never see, is that his occupation is supposedly that he's a painter and everything, although he's probably lying. But we don't really know exactly what he does for a living. It's not super important. It just would have been interesting to know for the simple reason that, again, a lot of serial killers, they tend to, the ones I'm thinking of anyway, they tend to, have these very like drifter existences, or they work in like these really menial labor jobs, something like that. Now, some of them not, like John Wayne Gacy or Ted Bundy, they had, pretty good life trajectories, all things considered. But and they were fairly well respected in their communities and
Based
everything.
on the home decor in his apartment, I could see him being like some type of outsider artist that sells artwork and is able to pay for his existence that way. He's obviously not living in luxury, but
Yeah, or like a
he's paying
janitor.
rent
I was
somehow,
imagining like a janitor, or like Jeffrey Dahmer worked as like a chocolate mixer candy
Yeah, I
factory
mean,
for
there
a
you
while.
go. Could be any of that stuff. I like that they kind of leave it, ambiguous or whatever. You don't really know. You're just getting like a glimpse into this dude's.
It's not super important. It's just more like it would have been interesting.
Yeah, maybe they could have done that in the sequel. I mean, there is interesting ways they could have spun this into a direct sequel. But obviously we get the headshot. I always wondered if like him carrying the weapons in the little violin case didn't have some influence on what Robert Rodriguez or whatever in Desperado later on, because he for sure saw this. He's into these type of movies, so it's just something I've wondered, I've pondered in the past. But he blows the shit out of Tom Savini's skull in that car when he's trying to make it with his girlfriend and just generally being a sleazeball. I don't know, man. That's one of the most glorious headshots still ever filmed. Those bits of skull bouncing all over the place.
That and the exploding head in Scanners.
That's a good one too.
Well,
Uh,
That's
this
just super
is
iconic right there. Yeah.
well, and this
Mhm.
one's particularly gnarly because well, it's done seriously. It's done very low budget, but very effectively, and it was done apparently with
in
live
one take without a
ammunition
perm.
and live ammunition, which, as we know from Rust, is kind of a dubious proposition these days, and for all time, really. But yeah, they did it in a way that was, like you said, without a permit and one take,
One take.
and apparently stashed the gun away in the trunk of another car that was right adjacent, just in case the cops were to be close by.
Yeah, they had to like run like hell from the cops for that. I think they had to run like hell from the cops before they to do that shot. After they got that shot.
Yeah, you don't stick around. That's the gun had its own getaway car, for God's sakes. They had this well planned. They were the fuck out of there. Probably didn't even clean that other car up. I bet whoever drove it out of there, like, it was all covered in the stage blood and stuff.
Well, and again,
Epic scene.
that bit, ripped right from the headlines, except that Son of Sam, David Berkowitz, his was a 44 revolver instead of
Yeah, but I mean, it definitely is like a proper murder scene. It's not, it's not hokey by any means. It's well drawn out with him peeking in the window at him, and the girl's like, "There's someone there," and she's freaking out. And Tom's just like, "I don't give a shit."
Well, it reminds me of Son of Sam crossed with a little bit of like the Zodiac Killer, because the Zodiac
Yeah,
Killer,
it's got that vibe to it as well.
Yeah.
And obviously that scene after he blows Savini's head up and he's just slowly putting the gun to that girl's face, that always just makes my skin crawl too.
Yeah,
it's pretty eerie.
And I think after that is where we basically get the beginning of the downtime, so to speak, or like the inklings of it. He's just hanging out in the park afterwards, and he sees this photographer lady taking pictures, and she ends up taking a photo of him. There's like a creepy bit with him and a little girl on like a bike. And then he just decides to randomly kill this nurse with a bayonet in the subway station. That's probably the most slashery section of the movie, where it feels more like your traditional slasher film. The kill's pretty sweet, all things considered. It's your proper bayonet impalement.
Well, the whole stalking her in the subway bathroom and stuff like that one feels the most traditionally slasher film-ish. But again, even that done seriously, done effectively, I could definitely see a lot of women in the audience probably getting pretty creeped out by that because of the fact that it is done seriously.
Oh yeah, that's that moment where you can start Savinian in on him. You know what I mean? Let him taste that lip sweater. It's just, kind of the most. I think that's probably the weakest kill in the movie, just because it feels so different to the other ones. Yeah. If you popped some goblin over that would hardcore feel like something you could see in an Argento movie or something. Just the way that they've kind of got all these prolonged shots of the subway and she's running around in there. And then we dive into full on like Friday the 13th type territory with her hiding in the bathroom stall and stuff. And then him being like, "Ha!" and he just pokes her after she comes out.
Now, I do have to give credit as far as like some of the victims of these slasher killers in movies. They tend not to be singled out for their acting necessarily, and largely it's because a lot of them aren't necessarily hired for their great acting. But I think that this person who gets killed by him in that scene, I think she does a particularly good job of being afraid, and and also the cinematography. There's a good amount of wide angle close-ups with you feel a sense of claustrophobia when she's in the bathroom stall, and she's really agonizing over the fact that he's right around the corner, presumably. And now I do think that whole sequence is a little on the long side, but it also out of all the scenes like that I've ever seen, it's one of the more effective ones, because they do take it seriously, and because she does a good job at making you feel sympathy for her.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I'm not knocking it by any means. I do like it. It just is. It's in stark contrast to the types of other stuff, which probably works in its favor too. It breaks up the rhythm a little bit. And then they really fucking just shatter the rhythm after this because he decides to, go calling in on the lady that took his picture in the park. And he kind of meets her, and this starts the weird little romance portion of Maniac, where I think they go on like some dates, some friend dates,
Yeah.
Like,
Which
I think
and,
the
That's
one point.
something
again,
that I do feel is very similar to Peeping Tom, because where you've got the killer, and he's got that one woman that he's dating or that is there, and you think to yourself, maybe the power of love can break him of that curse of what he's influenced by, and unfortunately, he's still inevitably drawn back in
yeah,
because
Exactly.
because
that's
evil
kind
is
of,
stronger than the goodness.
and that's where I was going to, because I was like, the sad part again is that he does have actual chemistry with her. You could buy she's way out of his league physically, but like something about the way he is with her, it's like, I could actually see them, working out,
Yeah,
presumably.
it could be a thing.
It
She
could,
just wants those paintings.
yeah, well, and he like when he needs to like have some charm or whatever he can. It's just he doesn't exhibit it with enough people, to where he could overcome whatever his social
Mm.
hangups are. And obviously it's a lot deeper than just that. But it's like, again, it's like you could have taken that whole segment of the movie, and that could be its own kind of Woody Allen esque,
Yeah, I
romantic
could see that happening.
comedy.
That'd be fun. But yeah, I mean, basically, they're just palling around. He's kind of trying to resist that urge, it feels like, to be murdering. He likes this lady. She seems to like him back. Like you said, they've got that chemistry. Eventually, though, he's got to go back to his old ways, and he just steals this girl's necklace so he can like return it to her and then kill her, which I always just found particularly sinister. That's like a proper sort of creepy serial killer thing to do. Um, I don't know. Any thoughts on that? That's quite the kill there, where he's basically using that knife in place of something else and crying and sobbing on top of her as he's like slowly stabbing her to death with a switchblade.
Yeah, that one, out of all the kills, I mean, just about all serial killers that I can think of, the kills tend to, in real life and in movies, but it does tend to have something of a misplaced sexuality element to it, because a lot of it is motivated by sexual dysfunction or frustration or something like that. That
Right.
one's probably the most overt out of all of them. And I
Yes,
think
sure.
by design too, because at this point his tenuous grasp of reality is becoming even more tenuous, so it makes sense for his kills
Yeah,
to
you
be
could.
more.
It's definitely, you could tell he's starting to unravel at that point, because during the previous murders he was able to hold it together till afterwards, kind of a thing. And this
Yeah.
one, he's right out of the gate, like, just loses it. I think he's actually referring to her as his mom before he
Yes.
kills her and stuff. So it's the fantasy or psychosis or whatever you want to call it in his head, the driving thing behind all of this is starting to kind of merge with reality at that point. And then he sort of just basically goes on to do what you do in any new relationship, and you take the new lady on a date to your mother's grave and just lose your
Yeah.
fucking mind in a graveyard in the middle of the night, start chasing her around.
Well, he
and
slipped
then
something about Rita,
Yeah.
which was the last girl he
Rita
killed,
knew.
and that's when she figures out that, oh no, he's the killer.
Oh yeah, Rita knew.
Yeah. Which again, it's like, there's something about if only he hadn't said that, then she would have seen, oh, he's sensitive, he loved his mother, and all that stuff, and then he fucks it up. And
Yeah, actually, that might have been a good thing. No, I think you're right, and I misread that. Maybe the old mommy's grave is a good idea.
Well, I was gonna say, like, I mean, because what's the apparently a big factor in what a woman finds attractive in a guy is if he has a good relationship with his mother, and it's in this case it's that he has reverence for her, given that she's no longer with him. And I could see that being spun into something good, but of course he, lets slip the wrong thing and all that stuff. And he actually attacks her, and it's like, well, okay, great. You blew any chances you had there with Carolyn Monroe, and not how many of us can realistically say we had a shot with her,
Right.
I shouldn't have said that. I should
Yeah,
not have said that.
Exactly.
To her
Well,
credit, too,
and
she effortlessly dips on him and whacks him with a shovel. Like,
yeah, I was gonna say she really shows her stuff relative to other slasher film girls and stuff.
it's
Like
a little
she
thing, too, but when she slices his bicep with that shovel, I always kind of wince because it's just
Yeah.
imagining how bad that would suck and how hard it would be to like repair, even if he did
That,
go
that
to the
really,
hospital.
yeah, that stuck with me a lot when I was watching it.
So after that, I think we get like a bit of a creep show moment where he goes back to the grave and the hands come out and grab him, and he's proper fucking lost his mind at this point. So he kind of hobbles back to the apartment, and we get the awesome ending sequence, where they bust into synchronized dance to the classic song Maniac. In reality, the mannequins come alive and rip him to shreds.
Well, in quote unquote reality, because then
yes,
in his
the
mind.
cops find him, and it looks like he stabbed himself. But then they have that last shot where his eyes open, and yeah, I'm not
There
sure
is,
if that's. I'm
there
not
is
sure
a
if that's meant to be like he actually survived his suicide attempt, or if that was just
Oh,
a
yeah.
there
final
is
little
a
thing to end the movie on.
there is a horror
But
comic book company called Ebon Press that did an adaptation of Maniac where they were allowed to like expand on some scenes and add some stuff. And they were also allowed to do a sequel to Maniac, so he does live through that and slip away.
there you go.
I think
Nice.
I think that's what they were aiming for, is just in case they wanted to do a sequel, this was the opening that they could use.
Yeah, it's their loophole. Because you could very easily imagine him having survived that, and then like somehow escaping from jail or killing people in jail, or I don't know. There's like some way you could have done a
Yeah.
direct sequel to this back in the day and made it still like vicious and gross, but like faithful to this first one somehow.
Yeah.
Or I don't know, maybe we don't know that all of that wasn't imagined in reality.
Well, that's kind of where I was.
Sequence. So
Yeah, that's kind
Well,
of
it
where I
could
was
be
going.
a American Psycho type deal
Yeah, exactly.
where he never
That's
killed
ki-
anybody.
That's kind of where I was going with it. I was like, once you open that door, then it's like, well, how much of this can you really accept? I do think that he's more than capable of going on his own self-destruction tour, which is kind of where he was headed. And same with Patrick Bateman. Even if he did not kill anyone, he was unquestionably going down a road of self-destruction. And that's partially what the story is about. So I could see it that way too.
yeah, you could work it any of those ways and it would still be cool. Maybe the second movie is where he actually does start killing people. Who knows? I think the final sequence there has always been a favorite for me, obviously, like splatter wise, it's a good middle ground kind of between what Savini was doing and Dawn of the Dead as far as like people getting dismembered, and then like Day of the Dead later, because he obviously did improve it quite a bit. Almost
And
to the
I'm
point of being
sure
uncomfortable.
I'm sure that there's a little bit of a satisfying factor for some audience members to see him presumably meet a bloody, gruesome end at the hands of his victims, even if it is in his own mind.
Oh yeah. Fun
and,
fact too, if memory serves, that machete in the movie is the machete from Dawn of the Dead, because I think it was one that Tom just had lying around,
And one of the bodies is Mrs. Voorhees from Friday the 13th, still in the
There you
sweater.
Well, good way to recycle.
Oh yeah, got to use those props.
Oh, actually,
man.
this movie came out. Although this movie came out months before Friday the 13th.
Yeah. And I can.
Well, it was probably, shooting and when the props were in use, though, that could overlap, right? Like,
Yeah.
it came out months before it, so there was probably some overlap in when Tom was maybe between sets, or you know what I mean.
Well,
Like,
and that is the thing with Friday the 13th did have mainstream Paramount distribution, but especially the very first one, at its core, it totally has like drive-in grindhouse roots, and that kind of, it has that in its blood. Ultimately, that's kind of the tradition it comes out of. It just happened to hit a formula that was able to be expanded upon and redone a couple different ways all throughout the 80s. And despite Paramount's best efforts, it kept being successful, and they kept making more of them, as much as they didn't want to. But they're like, well, if it makes money.
Dude, I mean, that movie, Friday the 13th, the first one, is equally responsible, along with this, of really like kicking off the 80s wave of slasher flicks. These were the ones. And it's interesting that Tom was involved in both of them, because it just they wouldn't have been the same without his effects in there, for sure.
Well, I give this one a little bit more credit in terms of like, as sleazy and scuzzy and icky as it is, I think it is that way intentionally, and I think it is that way for a reason beyond just being. I think it's there for a larger purpose that it doesn't back up the arguments of people that would say that it's just exploitive or whatever. I think it's meant to try to put one in the position of what a serial killer is like in all of its awfulness.
Exactly.
Because again, these kinds of people really exist in the world. So
for sure. I mean, and as much as I love the body count movies of the later 80s, and they are just a ton of fun, it is kind of a shame they didn't do more proper, like savage, mean-spirited flicks, like proper murder movies. I get why as well, because there was a lot of this shit going on for real during the decade, and you didn't want to really just could always be going out of your way to piss off those parents groups and stuff. So I think as the 80s went on, in a lot of respects, they played it a little safer in terms of the actual sinisterness of them. They became popcorn affair, which is great. Again, I'm a huge fan of that stuff, but this was a special era for this kind of shit. So I guess now we're at that point where we get to do favorite scenes, and I think we've touched really well on like how the movie was shot and the general like set design and vibe of it, and I think we're all in agreement that the soundtrack is pretty spectacular, right?
Yes,
great. Well, it's good.
Jay Shadoway's score is awesome.
Yeah, it's musically strong when it needs to be, like as music, but it's also appropriately discordant and eerie and not nice to listen to when it needs to be. Also, there's an art to something that's not nice to listen to when it needs to be.
To me, it's like a lot of these. I understand where it does its job, but I don't really feel it's something I'm going to be sitting there listening to on an album, for instance. Just to say, hey, man, I want to listen to this all day. So
I can listen to this all day. I've done that.
Yeah,
I dig it.
This has a great vinyl release, and also the 3-disc Blu-ray from Blue Underground, like the special one for the lenticular cover, does come with the soundtrack on CD.
That's right. Well, and I it depends on what mood you're in and what, because like there's a value to discordant music. There's a value to melodic music. There's they all have their place, and it's definitely appropriate for putting you in that kind of headspace.
For sure. It's maybe not the most toe-tapping score in the world, but
if only they'd have had Michael Cimbella's Maniac on there, then you'd have had it all.
And then there's that disco song.
Yeah. Which, and here's, so just larger societal thing. The late 70s and the early 80s, that was like the one time in history when you could have these really gruesomely violent films, or really like sexually perverse films or whatever, that had really kick-ass soundtracks that had like these really danceable themes, even in like the weirdest places, like the disco version of the song "We Are One" from Caligula. which is like a proper disco song. And it's from this film that's set in Roman times, and it's in ancient Rome. And it's like, well, that couldn't mismatch even more anymore. And yet, like, I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about like Cannibal Holocaust, Cannibal Ferox,
Yeah,
stuff
they
like
do have
that.
some catchy
have,
tunes
like,
on them.
Yeah, and
like,
it's
melodic
like,
soundtracks.
Right.
Yeah.
yeah, and it's like
Graduation Day.
it's like, what's the deal? You know, like we can't even get good melodic or catchy songs in like mainstream movies today. And then they had really great ones in these like super violent, super, sexually perverse movies in this very specific period in film history. And they're awesome.
It's great, dude. I mean, you got movies like The Mutilator that has I think it's The Mutilator. It has like a fucking like sitcom style 80s pop theme song. It's
I
amazing.
know. Or like
It even has like a montage of the characters to go along with it. Like you're about to fire up an episode of a sitcom, and then they just all get murdered. It's
well, and
great.
like Cannibal Ferox has like a proper like funk or disco soundtrack, and then like what was Emmanuel and the Last Cannibals, really really good soundtrack on that one.
Well, a lot of the Goblin stuff is basically, it's essentially synth pop music. A lot of it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just, I mean, I think the soundtrack for this one is leaning more towards servicing the subject matter rather than being catchy, but it's memorable for me at least.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Any of you guys got favorite scenes you want to throw out there? You got a favorite scene, Brandon?
Well, I'm not going to take the obvious favorite, so I'll go with the kill in the bathroom. I did like that. It has a kind of stalker-esque quality to it.
True. What about you, Dane? You got a favorite moment?
Well, before I say, Brandon, for you, would the obvious scene be the head explosion?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Well, just making sure, because I mean, I do love a good head explosion. Don't get me wrong. That's if I ever get killed in a movie, that's how I want to go. I want to have my head explode.
I mean, I almost got my head crushed on a film shoot a few weeks ago.
For real, or in
for this, in the script.
Okay, well, just making sure, because I was like, if you almost got your head crushed for real, then
that doesn't sound good.
But no, if I ever get killed in a movie, I do want to have my head explode someday. But anyway, favorite scene. Well, that's
goals.
Well, seriously. Well, that one is definitely the best effects wise. Although the one with Frank Zito's head coming off would probably be a close second as far as effects. But for me, my favorite scene, acting wise and just overall story wise, I actually like the part when he's looking at her photos and he's talking about, the photographer had her exactly how he wanted her. She couldn't grow old. She couldn't die. All that stuff, because that's where we really get into his psychology. And again, it's he's comes across as fairly normal in that scene, and the sentiments he's expressing in that scene are not unusual. They just, obviously, as we, the audience, know, they're taken to the nth degree, but given that he's a serial killer. But like that desire of wanting to preserve your loved ones and to have them not leave you and all that stuff, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. And so that does a good subtle job of communicating that in the context of the scene, and in a way that you could believe that he would really say that there. And even if he wasn't a serial killer, you could believe that just mentally that he's oriented that way, as a lot of people are. So
it'd almost be kind of beautiful if he didn't have
exactly,
severe schizophrenia or
and being a killer and all that stuff. But that's what I mean, is like that's what's underneath. That's what's underneath all the killing, underneath all the everything, and that desire is not uncommon. I know plenty of people who are not serial killers who feel that way.
For sure. What about you, Jake? You got a favorite scene or standout scene? Something that you'll probably remember.
This is one of those ones where it's hard to really pick a standout. I'm going to agree with Dane that the speech about the photographs was notable. I'm not sure I entirely liked it or anything, but it was notable. It was an interesting it was interesting seeing that peek into the character, I think.
It is, it's a good touch. What about you, Forrest? You got a favorite scene for the film?
I'll go for the obvious. The head explosion. Tom Savini getting his head blown off by himself.
Your head explode.
It's a great show. It's a great special effect. And also just knowing and it's a great special effect and just knowing what went into it. From just like making it to like getting that whole thing done in like one take and then running from hell from the cops without because they didn't have a permit and they're using a real gun in New York City at 3 a.m. It's
fucking rad.
Fucking rad, and I really respect like all the work that really went into doing that.
Where the
actually, I don't love respect. I say I have a lot of love for all the work that went into that.
Yeah, certainly. Right. Were the gun laws in New York City as stringent as they are now? I'm
not sure. I wasn't alive in New York. I was born in New York. I was born in the New York City area. First of all, I was born in '87, and second of all, I grew up in upstate. I actually grew up in upstate New York.
Yeah, well, I'd be willing to bet that they probably weren't that far removed from where they are now. I just know that any kind of gun is illegal in New York City.
Yeah, it is now. But although I would say gun violence in New York in general is like what you see in movies like this or like basically any Death Wish movie is not what it is in real life. There is gun violence in New York City, but it's like it's very far and few between.
Well, and to be fair, you shoot off a live round in a semi-public place anywhere, and you're probably going to get in trouble no matter where you are. So that's not exclusive to New York City.
Well, there's some logic with putting it down by the bridge, by the water. You got some stuff to like mask, probably traffic and like the general river sounds helped a little. Not a lot for it to bounce off down there so that it like echoes louder and all that shit. Well, I'm sure there was some thought put into where they did it because of how they had to do it,
Yeah, exactly. And this was in the pre-smartphone age, so they couldn't have people like just record that and then report it to the police saying there was an actual murder here. We have it on video, and it's like, no, we were just shooting a movie.
All right. What about you, Dustin? You got a favorite scene?
Well, whenever I think of Maniac, what actually comes to mind is, there are two scenes I think that would be my favorite scene. There's the monologue to himself. It's like, I know, and you know. That scene really stands out. I wish I could remember the entire speech, but it's long.
Where he's like, that whole long one where he's like, yes, miss, no, miss, or whatever. Please. It's like it's just this insane tangent of what seems like gibberish, but then as the movie builds itself around it, you get more context to it.
You're kind of like, I see what's going on here. Yeah,
that's fucking terrifying.
I like that scene a lot. Yeah, because it is very creepy. And also, I think I do like the bathroom scene as well. Just for kind of this little moment at the end, because she thinks she's gotten away, and he comes up from behind her and stabs her. And like as he's like just stabbing her, he's just like cackling, like I gotcha.
Yeah.
And I like that little moment because it's so nasty.
It really is. It's hard for me to really narrow it down to a favorite kill. I mean, I do like that one. I think it is the weaker one in terms of like visceralness, but it's got its place in there. I'm real partial to the one where he finally snaps at the end and he kills that lady with the switchblade while he's like rocking on top of her because it's just gross. In terms of like spectacle, of course, the headshot wins it. And I do really love all those creepy little like monologue things that he has. But I think if I have to pick like any more, that whole intro sequence of the movie is my favorite bit. Maybe that's just because it gets me so hyped for what's coming, but also just because it's out of the blue and just totally sinister. He goes down there and slits the lady's throat and then chokes the fuck out of that guy, and his feet are just like disturbingly flopping like super fast around as he's dying, and then it cuts to him like waking up in that bed screaming, and you kind of get that creepy sort of theme tune while he's, you know, getting dressed or whatever, and it just builds the sliminess of the movie so perfectly. And I love it, man. Like every time that I watch Maniac, I'm hyped. I'm fixed on the movie by the time that's done, you know, because it is one of those rare ones, like we were saying earlier, Forrest, you know, it's neither of our favorite horror film or slasher films, but it's on the list for sure. And it's one that even some of the ones that I would consider my favorites, I don't tend to watch as closely as I watch Maniac each time that I watch it. You know, it's not one that I can just throw on and kind of have as background shit.
No, it's
I
definitely
have to
not
watch
casual.
the whole movie.
It's definitely not like a background noise watch, which I can do for some horror movies, but not this one.
Yeah, it's one that I tend to, you know, get real immersed in when I watch it, because it's just creepy and gross and sinister, and it has a way of drawing you into it that I think, you know, obviously just isn't there in more gratuitous, like you know, over the top slasher movies, the beer and popcorn ones, you know, those, it's a totally different vibe. So yeah, that'd be mine, and I think that does it, guys. I think we did this justice. I don't know.
Yeah, and we covered the music, we covered the effects, both of which are spectacular. Yeah, I think we're I think we finished up in a pretty good time tonight.
Well, outros.
Alrighty, well, I am Mo. I do a channel that was formerly known as Drunken Master Studios. It is now Retro Cult Home Video, where I do all kinds of full moon content and soon to be a lot of independent horror reviews. So come on over and subscribe to get more of that.
Oh, I'm Dustin, also known as The Crypt of Horrors on YouTube. I collect anything related to horror, and you can see stuff from my collection on my Instagram at The Crypt of Horrors, and also on the YouTube channel, which I have about a dozen videos uploaded. I just need to do a lot of editing and description writing. So there's a ton of stuff that's ready to come out just as soon as I can sit down and do it. We had a lot of cool finds over the summer. So it's basically everything I found between May and now that's waiting to be going live.
Nice.
So including some really hot vinyls. So I've dropped a couple of them already in the past few weeks, but I want to get more of it live and ready to go. So watch my channel for more updates on those. We try to have fun, and hopefully you enjoy it.
All right, Jake.
Well, okay, I'm Kotobukijake, and I am a movie media fan collector here in Central Virginia, co-host of SeptumSin versus World, and I'm ready for bed.
as it should be, I guess. And Forrest.
All right, I'm Forrest Bennett. I'm an independent I'm a independent film producer based in Long Island, New York. Although right now I'm coming from Richmond, Virginia, where Brandon and Jake are from. Actually, was on their YouTube channel. I recorded a video for their YouTube with them on their YouTube channel, which is it's going to be dropping tomorrow.
Yeah, check it out.
I'm also a movie and comic book collector, and I've always got something going on in the pipeline, some kind of project.
Recently, a featured player in Amityville Thanksgiving, so look for that early 2022.
I saw SRS is going to distribute that, which is going to be pretty cool.
They're based in my hometown of Syracuse, New York.
So that's going to be awesome. Of course, I'm SeptumSin of SeptumSin versus the World. We do a lot of fun stuff on our channel. We're a little bit pared back, but we have a couple of things that we do. And we do have a wonderful pickup video with Forrest. We each cover 7 titles, so it's a lot of coverage, but I think you will like them all. There's a lot of SOV stuff. There's some Vinegar Syndrome. There's
some
a whole lot of awesome stuff this time.
Some critically acclaimed films, some critically acclaimed movies, both new and old.
And books. There's a book like with words in it. Yeah, I know. It's hard to believe. So it's going to be a fun old time on Wednesday night. But we also have an upcoming anime discussion on Monday, where we're going to be discussing Mauro. Is it?
Mawaru Penguin Drum.
There you go. That I was tripping on the first word, but a very interesting kind of Lynchian anime there. So I hope you all enjoy. Hope you all come to join us for that. Of course, Dave couldn't be here with us tonight, but this is Inside Movies Galore, where we discuss various movies, and he also does his own channel, Delusions of Grandeur, where he does interviews and further movie analysis, several of which with Boris. I know that they're covering the Star Wars series at the moment, so some very fun stuff. But next week, we end our mustache matinee on a questionably mustachioed player as we cover Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
I didn't do my outro.
Oh, sorry. Dane, go ahead.
I'm Dane Kyle, independent filmmaker and now film educator out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Best known for several shorts in the most recent series I did on YouTube, Oztober, on my rebranded channel, Dangerous Arts, DANEJUROUS Arts. And currently working on April in Wonderland, trying to get a good head start on that in time for April 2022. So stay tuned.
All right. Well, I guess that ends us for the night. Well, I guess we'll all have to take a shot to the head tonight. But with that being said, good night, all.
Good night.
Good night, everyone, and happy Thanksgiving.